Imagine um filme em que guerra ou terror encontra uma verdade inconveniente. Esse filme é A Era das Consequências, do americano Jared Scott. Diretor de longas premiados como A Grande Muralha Verde, exibido na mostra Ecofalante em junho, o cineasta investiga nesse filme os impactos das mudanças climáticas e sua relação com os conflitos ao redor do mundo. Para isso, ele ouve oficiais militares que analisam como secas, falta de alimentos, ondas migratórias, condições climáticas extremas, entre outros fatores, aceleram a instabilidade em tantos países. Ao final, A Era das Consequências faz um grande alerta. Jared conversou conosco e comentou como teve a ideia de relacionar a crise climática às questões de segurança nacional e internacional. Confira.
In the beginning of The Age of Consequences, which is an exploration of how climate change impacts national security, both in my home country of the US and global security around the world, the idea is that, we look at the idea of thermonuclear war because the threat of nuclear war is something that is, it's this really uncomfortable thing. And just like climate change, it's also uncomfortable, but we still have to talk about it. So things that are uncomfortable, unprofitable, or inconvenient are things that we tend to avoid as a human family.
But it's already happening, isn't it? Like we are in denial that it's already happening. Like you show us what happened in Syria.
Yeah, there's people that deny climate change. There's people that are climate delayers that say, well, it's just a problem, it's still far off. There's people that are, there's all sorts of different ways of approaching this problem. Again, I think it's unprofitable, it's inconvenient, and it's something that isn't always, it's not an easy thing that we're programmed to fix. It's a really complicated problem. It's arguably the greatest challenge the human family has ever faced. But yeah, in the film, The Age of Consequences, we explore how climate change acts as a threat multiplier, how it makes everything worse is the simple way to understand it. So, climate change creates these impacts like drought, rainfall and variability, which begets food and water insecurity, and that can in turn affect socio-political issues. And you have financial stress, you have migrations, you have different factors then that stem from that root of climate change, but you have to think of it in this complex web of a number of interrelated forces.
How did you have this idea of having the Pentagon, the military people who thinks about this together to tell us this story?
With The Age of Consequences, we were figuring what's another way to have a conversation that might bring more people into the tent. And the idea of security was something that I thought would help diffuse the partisanship and diffuse the political aspects around the issue. And so I think as a filmmaker, I'm just always trying to find new ways to do it. And the other film that you mentioned, which has also been presented to your audience, which is really exciting, is The Great Green Wall. And in that film, we followed in Umoja across this burgeoning idea to grow an 8,000 kilometer wall of trees stretching across the entire continent of Africa. But ultimately, the idea is to just get more people talking about this, bring people into the tent, help spark conversations, help create, help educate, inspire, and hopefully spark action.
How people are dealing with this, like having your other films into perspective?
In the film we mentioned several times, just because you're looking at a problem or assessing the problem doesn't mean you're solving the problem. And, oftentimes the security angle is when mitigation and adaptation efforts fall short, then you start looking at consequence management. So the last thing we actually want are militaries, not just in the US, but in Brazil or other countries. I mean, militaries don't have a great track record around the world. We don't want militaries dealing with social problems. We want democratically elected governments dealing with those problems. I think oftentimes people think about climate change as this esoteric issue that's happening somewhere else. And when you know that your own, security experts in your country are looking at this and thinking about how that impacts I mean, at the end of the day, what's government there for, right? You can argue the fundamental reason that we have government is to keep us safe.
As you said, we don't need to be fatalist or, get crazy about it right now, but it's a call to action.
Just like climate change, the solutions to climate change are a process. Individually and collectively, what we do, those series of choices we have, will create a series of outcomes. It's like that everything we actually we do matters, and it's not binary. So, we do have to think about what we do and how it matters, and any way that we can get there, any way that we can talk about it or think about it or engage is fundamentally important. And I think that's why we make these films, to try to get people to talk about it.
Yeah, everything's connected, and also the way we deal with this, like the drought in Syria, the young men with no work, no houses, lots of instability and no hope. It affects our future, don't you think?
There is this idea of global equity that we have to be aware of. We can't, as the global north, as the richer countries or the richer people in the world, live a large, carbon footprint lifestyle. That affects those who are living a small carbon footprint lifestyle, and usually they're bearing the brunt of the crisis.
It's also a social issue, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I think it's only by accident that climate change has been often framed as an environmental issue. Just like climate change, I think there's a lot of places where, the wealthier people are going to be able to, at least for some amount of time, avoid some of the consequences. And disproportionately, we'll see people be affected at the bottom. And that's, that's unjust. And that's something that we need to work towards as a global family to recognize, acknowledge, and fight against. And you hear it a lot right now, but climate injustice is a form of racial injustice, and we need to stop it.
Do you think that the COVID crisis will bring some changes?
It's something that we knew was coming, but we didn't prepare for. It's something where we're lacking leadership. And those are the same problems with any emergency, and the climate emergency is no different. We're lacking leadership, we're lacking political will. And so, I guess the only positive aspect I can think of with the COVID crisis is at least the global society has called it a crisis. We call it a pandemic. We call it an emergency. Young people, the next generation, have had enough. And we need to empower the young people. And that's what gives me hope.
And especially because maybe we are the last generation that can do something.
Mitigation, the act of not emitting, of keeping fossil fuels in the ground and out of the air. That's a fundamentally equal thing that benefits all of us, no matter whether I'm in Sao Paulo or Berlin. But we have to realize that mitigation is the answer. We have to fundamentally stop burning fossil fuels and heating up the atmosphere.
I agree with you, especially being from Brazil and where Amazon is under threat more than ever. We need to rethink everything, and globally, because Amazon is connected to everybody, not in terms of the forest, but in terms of the work power and the meat and, the foods, everything's connected.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all connected. We're all in this together, and we can't, that's another thing that worries me too, is, the rise of nationalism, the rise of, when we have these crises, that we all look within, because these are global crises. And we have to solve them as a global family. There can't be a Brazilian response or a U.S. response or a China response. We all have to mitigate warming together.
How do you see these film festivals online, as ours is being made now, and also environmental film festival? How do you think cinema can help us to talk about what you're talking about now?
It's about, oftentimes creating this offline engagement where people can come together, and the film can be a platform. It can be a start of a conversation. You can bring people together, you can talk, you can discuss, you can have panels afterwards. So, that offline experience has always been so valuable. And we'll be back to that at some point. But I think for right now, if we can all find ways to support festivals, support theaters, and keep the conversation going, because we want them to be back, once we get through this.
What would you say to the Brazilian audience about your film and the festival? What would you say?
just get involved. I mean, right now we're struggling through this crisis together, and I think try to recognize the climate crisis in the same way that we recognize this global pandemic, because it's a pandemic as well, and do something. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to take a purity test. If you can't go fully vegan, it's okay. Just try to move to a plant-based diet. If you can't go to every march, that's okay. Just go to some marches. If you can't educate yourself about every political candidate, educate yourself about the ones locally and try to vote for the people that believe in the right things. If you want to try to talk about this with people, try to go out and arm yourself with some information. I mean, the idea is that we empower ourselves and we just try to start making decisions. We can't live a fully sustainable life, and we're probably never going to be, just as humans, we are going to at some point use something and do something, but be mindful of what you do and think about that value shift that needs to happen for all of us to solve these global problems.
Thank you, Jared. Really, thanks.
Esse foi Jared Scott, conversando com a gente sobre A Era das Consequências. Fique ligado na programação e nos próximos papos, porque ainda tem muita conversa boa aqui na Mostra Ecofalante 2020.